When we think of our pulse, most of us just picture a number, right? Beats per minute. But what if it's way more than that? What if it's a really detailed message, like a secret language sent straight from your heart, and we just need to learn how to listen?
Just think about that. The idea that by simply placing your fingers on your wrist, you could decode a whole story about your cardiovascular health, well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into in this explainer. We're going to learn how doctors do just that, turning a simple beat into this rich source of information. So here's the key idea. Your pulse isn't just about speed. It has a rhythm, it has strength, it has tension, and it even has a distinct shape. And every single one of these properties tells a different part of the story about how well your heart and your blood vessels are actually working.
Okay, so before we can even start decoding this message, we have to know how to receive it. So let's kick things off with the absolute basics, how to find your pulse the way a professional would.
So you're going to want to use your index and middle fingers. The reason you don't use your thumb is because your thumb actually has its own pulse, and that can get really confusing. You're feeling for what's called the radial artery, which sits right there on the bone just under the skin. Then just apply enough gentle pressure until you can clearly feel that rhythmic push against your fingertips.
Now, here's something really interesting that serves as the very first diagnostic check. A doctor will often feel the pulse on both wrists at the exact same time. Why? Well, if one is noticeably weaker than the other, what's called a different pulse, that could be a clue that something is narrowing or maybe even blocking an artery somewhere along its path from the heart. Pretty clever, right?
All right, so once you've found the pulse, the real analysis begins. Doctors aren't just counting, they're listening for several key characteristics in this rhythmic wave. So let's break them down.
First up is frequency. This is the one we're all familiar with. It's simply how fast your heart is beating. For a healthy adult who's just relaxing, that's usually somewhere between 60 and 90 beats per minute. In medical terms, you might hear a faster pulse called frequent and a slower one, rare.
And this is a perfect example of just how sensitive your pulse frequency is. I mean, look at this. Even tiny changes in posture, going from lying down to sitting up or from sitting to standing, makes your heart rate tick up just a little bit to adapt. It's this incredible, dynamic system that's constantly adjusting. Next up is rhythm. A healthy pulse should feel like a metronome, just perfectly steady. Each beat arrives at a predictable interval. But if the beats are all over the place, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, with no real pattern, that's considered irregular, and it can be a sign of an underlying issue like an arrhythmia. Now, this leads to a really fascinating and, frankly, critical question. Is it actually possible for your heart to contract, but for that beat to be completely missing from the pulse you feel at your wrist? Well, the answer is a definite yes. This whole phenomenon is called a pulse deficit. It happens when a heartbeat is so weak that the pressure wave it creates just doesn't have enough oomph to make it all the way to your wrist. So the heart is beating, sure, but it's not a productive beat. It's not actually getting the job done.
And to put that into perspective, a pulse deficit of 30 is serious. It means that in a single minute, your heart has wasted 30 beats. That's 30 times that your body's tissues were expecting a fresh delivery of oxygen and nutrients that just never showed up. It's a huge sign of inefficiency.
Okay, let's move on to the next property, tension. This is all about how much pressure you need to apply with your fingers to make the pulse disappear. A tense, kind of wiry pulse that's really hard to press down often points to high blood pressure. On the flip side, a soft pulse that vanishes with just a little bit of pressure can suggest the opposite. And this next one, filling, is closely related. So while tension tells us about the pressure inside the artery, filling tells us about the volume of blood that's creating the wave. Does the artery feel strong and full with each beat, or does it feel kind of weak and empty? This gives us a direct clue about how much blood the heart is pumping out with each contraction. A full pulse suggests a strong pump, an empty one, a weaker pump. So, we've covered frequency, rhythm, tension, and filling. Now let's get into the really cool part, looking at a few specific types of pulses where these characteristics combine to tell a very specific story about what's going on with a person's health. Get this, the pulse wave also has a shape you can feel. A rapid pulse feels like a really sharp, quick tap that just rises and falls suddenly. A slow pulse, on the other hand, feels more like a gradual swell that builds and then fades away. These different shapes can point to very specific conditions, like problems with the aortic valve. And here are some other absolutely fascinating examples. A filiform pulse is so weak and fine that it literally feels like a thread under your fingers. It's a huge warning sign in cases of shock or massive blood loss. Then you've got the dichrotic pulse, where you can feel a second, smaller beat on the downslope of the main wave, something that can show up with high fevers. And maybe the most insightful of all is the paradoxical pulse. This is when the pulse actually gets weaker when you breathe in. It's a key sign for certain cardiac issues because it shows that the pressure changes in your chest from breathing are directly messing with the heart's ability to fill up with blood properly.
So, after decoding all these different elements, the rhythm, the shape, the tension, what's the big picture? What does this complex language of the heart really mean for all of us? Well, this really is the crucial takeaway. The pulse isn't just one thing. It's an integrated signal that combines information about the heart's pumping action, the pressure inside your arteries, and even the health and flexibility of the vessel walls themselves. And that right there is the real power of this examination. By methodically assessing all these different properties, a seemingly simple touch is transformed into a super sophisticated diagnostic tool, revealing a surprisingly complex and detailed story about what's happening deep inside your body. You know, the language of the pulse is just one of the many ways our bodies are constantly communicating with us. It's a great reminder to stay curious, to listen closely, and to always ask, what other signals is my body sending? And am I actually paying attention?